The clouds in the sky. Are there some of those clouds that you dread? Hey, welcome as we take another look into the life and message of Elisabeth Elliot. She called us to live to a higher standard and not settle for second best. Our series continues in the coming weeks as we hear from family, friends, and others influenced by Elisabeth Elliot. Hey, thanks for coming along again today. And if it's your first time, a special welcome to you. We're wrapping up a very short series, just 4 parts, so last week and today, as we've dealt with the topic of a sovereign Lord. Today we look at not just a sovereign Lord, but the contrast with human powerlessness, and a look at the clouds you dread. Today, Elisabeth will read from an out-of-print book. It's called The Liberty of Obedience. Do those seem contradictory? Liberty and obedience? And later on, we'll hear from John Hanson, who wrote the theme song for our time together. He'll talk about one of Elisabeth's best-known bits of advice. First, though, let's get to part 3 of A Sovereign Lord. As we think about those times when we feel utterly inadequate, I can't do it, we say to ourselves, say out loud, maybe say in prayer. And crying out to God for help should never be a last resort, should it? A sovereign Lord and human powerlessness.
Most of us, I suppose, have been asked to do things which we felt totally incapable of. I remember the day when my baby was born. I was overwhelmed with a sense of utter inadequacy and poverty. Here was a human life utterly dependent upon me and my husband Jim. It brought tears to my eyes to think of the dependence of this little helpless girl. It brought tears to my eyes even more to think of my own powerlessness. My real feeling, and I wasn't just being foolishly humble, my real sense was, Lord, there is no way that I can adequately mother this child. But we've been talking about a sovereign God who loves to choose the things which are weak, to bring to naught the things which are. A sovereign Lord and human powerlessness. In my last talk, we referred to the story of Gideon. You remember that the Midianites had proved to be too strong for Israel, and the Israelites were forced to hide in hollow places in the mountains and caves and strongholds. The Midianites had taken over, destroyed the crops. They came up with herds and tents, the Bible says, like a swarm of locusts. They and their camels were past counting. So the Israelites were brought to destitution by the Midianites. Have you been brought to destitution in some way or other? Financially, physically, morally, spiritually, educationally? In what way have you been forced to recognize your own powerlessness? What did the Israelites do when they were brought to destitution? It says they cried to the Lord for help. And I hope you've done that. I hope that's not always the last resort in your life, to cry to the Lord for help. God uses people to help others. God uses men and angels, stormy winds to fulfill His word. He puts the moon in the sky as a faithful witness. He uses the handicapped. He certainly has in my life. I have handicapped friends who have taught me many things. He uses prayer, the prayers of others. I think of the prayer of my friend Van, as I told you about in another talk, when I was driving up a highway and could have been killed instantly by a head-on collision. We learned later that at that particular time, God had brought me to the mind of my friend Van, who was at home taking care of my daughter Valerie, and she had immediately prayed for me. Over the years, it has been suggested to me a number of times that it would be a good idea for me to have a radio broadcast. But I was absolutely powerless to do anything about it. I'm not any good at all at self-promotion, and it's not the kind of thing that I would have ever made an effort to bring about or bring into being myself. But I have a friend named Jan Anderson. She has sort of bugged my life over the past decade or more, and I don't mean that in a bad sense. She came to hear me speak a few times, and she wrote me some very nice letters, and when she was a missionary in Ecuador herself, she sent me a tape, and gradually I began to be conscious that this woman had something to say to me. And what she finally said was, "You're going on the radio." But it's an illustration to me of how God, who is sovereign, gets done what he wants done in ways that we cannot even imagine. And he usually makes use of people to do that. And if you were to ask Jan, do you think that you are the perfect producer or director? I'm sure Jan's answer would be no, 1,000 times no. Humility consists in recognizing ourselves for what we are, and this is important, in lovingly accepting to be so. It's one thing to say, oh, well, I'm no good, and I'm not really great, and I'm not perfect, and I'm not the best producer, and I'm not the best writer or the best speaker. To recognize your wretchedness, St. Francis de Sales has said, is not humility. It is merely not being stupid. Shall I repeat that? St. Francis de Sales says, to recognize one's wretchedness is not humility. It is merely not being stupid. But humility must include two things, the recognizing of ourselves for what we are and the acceptance. The kingdom is not promised to the wise of this world, but to the little ones. And if we are to become little, knowledge must be accompanied by acceptance. Without acceptance, humility is not only incomplete, it simply doesn't exist. We must measure ourselves against God's greatness, against the eternal majesty of his love and his glory. If we just say to God, well, I'm but dust and ashes, then that's not enough. We must say, I am but dust and ashes, and we must glory in that poverty. We must rejoice in that. And as one writer has said, some modern spiritual writers have omitted from their teaching this prostration before God's majesty, performed with the silence and recollection which are part of humility and adoration. And that happened to be written a long time before television ministry, but I would add that there are not only spiritual writers, but spiritual speakers and television ministers who regularly omit this sense of prostration before God's majesty and the acknowledgement of our own poverty. And when they do that, they are concentrating too much on man and what man is, which prevents man from opening his heart to God. We need to have people help us to acknowledge what we are and to open our hearts to God. If we don't do that, we are shallow and unhelpful. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." Now, what does that mean? That has nothing to do with economics, does it? The poor in spirit are those who recognize the truth about themselves. They are poor and needy and helpless and wretched. And we need the mercy of God. We need what he can give us. You remember what he said to one of the churches in the book of the Revelation. You are poor and wretched and needy and helpless, and you think you're rich. There was no acknowledgement of their own poverty. But real humility knows and accepts and even rejoices in that poverty, because it is our poverty that qualifies us to come and receive Christ's riches. It's in our weakness that we come to him for strength. It's in the acknowledgement of sin that we ask for salvation. And when we look at the holiness of God, we say with Isaiah the prophet, "Woe is me, for I am undone." And when Gideon was given an assignment by God that he was chosen to lead the people of Israel, he was immediately smitten with the sense of his own helplessness and powerlessness. But the angel said, "Go in this strength of yours." And he said, "Me? Not me, surely. I'm the wrong one, the weakest in the family." But the word of the Lord came and said, "But I will be with you." Do you think it's any different today? The word of the Lord comes to you and me. I will be with you. My presence shall go with you, and I will give you rest. And as Jan and I began this radio program, it was scary to me. She says it was scary to her, too. I find that hard to believe because she's such a pro. But I'd never done anything like this before. Why did we do it? Well, for the very simple reason that it seemed to both of us that it was the next thing God was asking us to do. And if it's something that God is asking us to do, don't we have a right to expect that He will be with us? That He will make up the slack in our own powerlessness? What He is asking of us is that we offer ourselves, that we make ourselves a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, an act of spiritual worship. When I think of missionary work, I think of the inadequacies, the failures, the prejudice, the personality clashes, the stupidity, the cultural faux pas, the clashes that went on between missions and between missionaries. Yes, believe me, they did. Why does God seem to bumble along using us bumbling human beings? Well, because He's sovereign, for one thing, because He has a purpose in mind to get things done in His way. Do you remember that wonderful old hymn, "God moves in a mysterious way His wonders to perform? He plants His footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm." My house looks out over the Atlantic Ocean, and I often think of those words as I look out there. What mysterious ways God does choose. You can't make a path in the storm. You don't see anybody's footprints on those angry waves. But God knows how to plant His footsteps in the sea and ride upon the storm. Second stanza says, "Deep in unfathomable mines, with never-failing skill, He treasures up His bright designs and works His sovereign will." Those words were written more than 200 years ago by William Cowper, C-O-W-P-E-R. God moving in mysterious ways, getting His work done, sovereign Lord and human powerlessness.
Part 3 of A Sovereign Lord. The final part comes in just a little bit. Next, we'll be looking at clouds that you may be dreading. First, though, let's hear from Elisabeth as she reads from one of her out-of-print books. Maybe you're not even familiar with it, The Liberty of Obedience. She'll give an example of what seemed like an obviously friendly gesture, a reminder that what looks like love to one person might look like evil to another.
If it is a difficult thing to live above reproach in one's society where values are judged at least similarly, how much more difficult it is in another culture. Each society has its own way of expressing itself, and what looks like sin in one context may look like virtue in another. The Aucas were convinced, for reasons they themselves could not give, that outsiders were cannibals. Quite naturally, then, they were prepared to interpret the behavior of any outsider they might meet as characteristic of a cannibal. When 5 missionary men met the Aucas on a sand strip of the Curaray River, they tried in every way they knew to show the Indians that they were friendly. One of the missionaries put his arm around an Auca man, a gesture which to us cannot be understood in any way other than friendliness. Years later, I learned from the Aucas themselves that they had taken this to be proof of the foreigners being a cannibal. It was a gesture that had no meaning for an Auca and therefore must be a gesture common to cannibals. What looks like love to us looked like hostility to the Aucas. Jesus' love for common men led Him to eat and drink with them, and for this He was called a glutton and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners. To the pure, all things are pure. Clearly, it is not possible to behave in a way which would be understood by all, let alone accepted by all. God alone, who is above all and in us all, judges rightly, and therefore it is before him that we stand or fall.
That's from The Liberty of Obedience. It's an out-of-print book, but you can hear it on Audible. Later on, we'll be hearing from John Hanson, who wrote the theme music for our time together. Right now, let's go to part 4, our final part in our short series, A Sovereign Lord. As you look up in the sky and you see those clouds, maybe sometimes they're white and puffy, other times dark and ominous. Have you ever thought about the burdens of today, that they're really enough rather than taking on the worries of tomorrow? A biblical example of dealing with problems from the life of Gideon. Remember, it matters to God about you.
Can you remember what you were worrying about a week ago today? Think back. What day is it? Do you remember what you worried about a week ago? Was it worth the energy? Did it happen? If not, what a waste. If so, even worse. If it didn't happen, it was a waste. If it did happen, what good did it do to have worried about it? Most of what we worry about never happens. Furthermore, it's forbidden. Do you realize that it is forbidden to us to worry? Jesus said, "Take no thought for the morrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." Jesus knew exactly what he was talking about. We've been in situations, haven't we, when we realized that the burdens of today were just about all we could handle. We didn't need to take on any burdens of tomorrow. And Paul says in his epistle of joy, the letter to the Philippians, he says, "Don't worry about anything whatever." That's pretty cut and dried, isn't it? He doesn't say don't worry about anything unless it's important. Don't worry about the little things, just worry about the big ones. He says don't worry about anything whatever. That's a word that I need over and over again because I am a worrywart. It's very easy for me to worry. It comes naturally, I guess, coming from a long line of worriers on both sides of the family. I can remember teasing our father because he worried about many things, and then we used to say, "You worry when you can't think of anything to worry about." But it is forbidden. It says, don't worry about anything whatever, but in everything with earnest and thankful prayer, let your requests be made known to God. That's what we're supposed to do. If things come to us which are worrisome, that's our opportunity to take them to God in prayer. There's an old gospel song that says, "Oh, what peace we often forfeit. Oh, what needless pain we bear. All because we do not carry everything to God in prayer." Do you carry everything to God in prayer? What about right this minute? Now let's stop for a second and think about the most worrisome thing in your life. What is it? Have you taken it to God in prayer? And have you left with the burden still on your shoulders, or did you leave the burden at the cross? Casting all your care upon him, for it matters to him about you. I remember my Greek professor in college pointing out to us that the Hebrew words for "he careth for you" can be translated, "it matters to him about you." I love that word. We've been talking about the story of Gideon. Gideon was a very brave man in some ways, but Gideon was also full of fear. And when he was told that he had to lead the children of Israel, he was trembling in his boots. But it says he did take 10 of his servants, and he did as the Lord had told him. But he was afraid of his father's family and his fellow citizens. I really don't suppose that he was afraid that they were going to do him physical harm. I rather imagine that he was afraid of what they would say and what they would think of him. Most of us are much more tempted to that kind of fear than we are physical fear. What will they say? What will people think? So it says he did it by night and not by day. And I love the fact that God met him where he was, even a man so timid that he was afraid of what his father's family and fellow citizens might think of him, so that he did it by night and not by day. God let him do it. God made that concession. And when the citizens rose early in the morning, they found the altar of Baal overturned. That was what he had been commanded to do. The altar of this heathen god was turned upside down, and the sacred pole had been cut down, and a yearling bull had been offered up. And everybody was wondering who did it. And after searching all around, they were told that it was Gideon, the son of Joash. So they went to Joash, his father, and they said, "Bring your son out. He has overturned the altar of Baal and cut down the sacred pole beside it, and he must die." But as they crowded around him, Joash retorted, "Are you pleading Baal's cause then? Do you think it's for you to save him? Whoever pleads his cause shall be put to death at dawn. If Baal is a god and someone has torn down his altar, let him take up his own cause." And on that day Joash named Gideon, his son, Jerubbaal, saying, "Let Baal plead his case against this man." And then the Spirit of the Lord took possession of Gideon. He sounded the trumpet, and the people came out to follow him. Even though he had doubted God's presence, he resented God's not performing the miracles that he thought God should have performed. He felt desolate and forsaken. God wasn't doing what he thought God was supposed to do. And God had said, "This is your chance to do something. You do something." And Gideon had been arguing with him. Why has this happened? How am I supposed to do it? And then the word, "Peace be with you." Gideon's response was worship. He recognized then that he was dealing with God. And so he built an altar. And he named it Jehovah Shalom, God of peace. But it was a pretty scary command that had been given to him to take down the sacred pole. After all, that was the symbol of the religion of the people. And that was sacred and not to be touched. But his father defended him, and the Spirit of the Lord took possession of him. Sometimes we think that we have to get to some special height or level or altitude of spirituality in order to expect the Spirit of God to do anything for us or in us. I know that's been my feeling many times. And yet, I've come and cast myself completely on the mercy of God, knowing that my prayer life was not what it should be, knowing that I could never call myself spiritual in any very consistent sense, knowing that I'm dishing out a great many things from God's Word to people in meetings, on radio broadcasts, in books, that I myself am not by any means perfectly living up to. What can I do? Am I to wait until I have reached that height of spirituality which is going to satisfy my standard, let alone God's standard? No. I can only cast myself on the mercy of God. And God was merciful to Gideon, even though Gideon was so unbelieving that he made him prove himself by visible signs. You remember the fleeces that he put out. And God let it be so. The fleece was dry, and on the ground there was dew. And so God meets us according to our needs. He knows our frame. He remembers that we are dust. We've been referring to William Cooper's wonderful hymn, "God Moves in a Mysterious Way." Verse 3 of that hymn says, "Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy, and shall break in blessings on your head." I hope that there's some people out there with a notebook and a pencil, and you'll take down those words, because it might be exactly what you need today. I couldn't tell you how many times I've had to repeat those words over to myself. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy, and shall break in blessings on your head. I've wasted an awful lot of time and energy worrying about things, and a week later I can't even remember what it was. Did it do me any good? Jesus says by worrying you can't add 1 inch to your stature. Doesn't do one bit of good. If the thing's going to happen or if it's not going to happen, worrying accomplishes nothing. The clouds you so much dread are big with mercy. Whatever that thing is that you are so apprehensive about, it might be big with mercy instead of big with disasters, devastation, horror, destruction, poverty, the collapse of everything. Is that really what you're expecting? Big with mercy. And even in the things which look like human disasters, God shows his mercy. I told you the story a few days ago of Judy Ann Squire, the woman who was born with no legs at all. It was the most traumatic experience in her parents' life. And yet Judy is able to say she has seen the mercy of God throughout her life. He has blessed her far beyond her wildest imaginings. The clouds that her parents so much dreaded, for her sake, undoubtedly, the pain of the parents is because of their imagination of the pain of the child. But those clouds were big with mercy. That's the business that God is in. He's in the business of maintenance and repair and creation. If any man is in Christ, he is a new creation. Old things are passed away, and all things become new. What are those clouds that you dread today?
The fourth and final segment in A Sovereign Lord, our series that was called The Clouds You Dread. You know, as we've thought today about human powerlessness and about clouds and worry, maybe it would be a good time to talk about how to handle those times when you feel overwhelmed. Maybe you have what seems like 100 things to do. Well, John Hanson, who wrote our theme music for our time together, especially wanted to emphasize one of Elisabeth's favorite bits of wisdom.
When I hear Elisabeth's name, the first thing that comes to my mind is wisdom. And even through being reintroduced to this project, through doing the music and things, I was just really blessed with being able to listen to some of her talks and just realize, re-realize how relevant what she was saying is, even, today. And so God really used her in a kind of transcendent way, I'd say. And that's awesome. I think that's kind of was the way that she operated her life, though, and wanted, and other people got to kind of drink from that well, per se, because she just wanted to follow Jesus every day. One of my favorite quotes or things that she said is, do the next thing. For the place that I'm at right now, I believe that God is calling my family to be missionaries to Japan. That's really been a helpful and motivating thing for me. I even have it on my phone. As I open my phone, it says, do the next thing. It just reminds me that God is in the present, and he's just with us, even when it seems mundane, or it just seems like things are just, whatever.
Musician John Hanson, thanks for joining us for the journey today. Somebody has said, before you criticize someone, walk a mile in his shoes. That way, if he gets angry, he'll be a mile away and barefoot. Well, I don't know what the journey has for you today, but hopefully you found something today from God's Word to help you. And thanks for letting us come along with you, maybe in your home or your office, maybe along with you as you took that walk. On behalf of the Elisabeth Elliot Foundation, in cooperation with the Bible Broadcasting Network, let me invite you to check out all the resources at elisabethelliot.org. What are those resources? Well, they include talks, devotionals, videos, more Gateway to Joy programs, and more. ElisabethElliott.org. And if you get a chance, leave a review for us wherever you found this program. Thanks. Until next time, may God remind you each and every day, you are loved with an everlasting love, and underneath are the everlasting arms